Hi, class. Welcome back. This week we enter the exciting world of outlines. So we're going to be actually working on writing our speeches. The speech we had previously, the any old bag speech, I wanted you to organize and prepare it, but not necessarily write everything out sentence by sentence. From here on out, that's going to be the process we use. And every time I teach this class, which has been a few times now, I get questions from students saying, why do we have to write outlines? Why can't we just write like we do an essay or a report? Why do I have to write something anyway? Why can't I just open my brain and let the thoughts come out? One, because if you just open your brain and let the thoughts come out, who knows what's going to come out? It's best to be prepared. And two, outlining creates a better way for you to be able to edit, to be able to add material wherever you need to add it, to take out material wherever you need to take it out. It basically puts all the sentences of your speech one at a time in a format where it's much easier for you to see individual pieces and be able to play with them more easily. And we're going to be dealing with two types of outlines, a preparation outline and a speaking outline. What you will turn in is going to be the preparation outline. So let's just jump right into there. Hopefully you've already read your chapter on outlining. And luckily for me, it gives a certain amount of leeway as to how I want you all to do them. So we're going to find out today exactly how I want you all to turn in your preparation outlines. For this class, we use alphanumeric outlines. Now, you might be asking yourself right now, what in the world is an alphanumeric outline? We've probably used one before if you were in high school. Hopefully, you've used one before when you were in high school. Those are the ones where your main points are Roman numerals. So Roman numeral 1, number 2, 3, the 4 is a B and an I, that kind of thing. The subpoints are capital letters, A, B, C, D. The subpoints are numbers. And if you had to do subpoints, they would be lowercase letters. But a lot of times in speeches, and especially for our purposes, our speeches are not going to be so long that we're going to have to be that detailed. So usually we deal with just the Roman numerals, the capital letters, and then the numbers. And I'm going to show you, if you're not totally familiar with this, I'll give you an example. And in fact, I've attached this very example to this week's class information, the content. At the top of your outline, you will always have a specific purpose listed and your central idea statement. You will be counted off if you do not have one of those two things or both not on your outline. Boy, this sentence is in all caps. It must be important. All points, subpoints, subpoints. If it's something you're going to say in your speech, it must be written in a complete, full sentence. Transitional sentences go between the main points and they will be in parentheses. And then there will be a works cited section at the end. Now, your how-to speech coming up, you will not turn in a preparation outline. That is because most of the information you have is going to be coming right out of your brain. I'm not expecting you to do a lot of research for it. So you really don't have to do a works cited for it. Now, if you do happen to use some kind of information that comes from someone else, it would be a good thing for you to say, hey, you know, this is my mom's recipe, or my dad showed me how to do this, or give a reference to wherever you might have learned whatever you're demonstrating. That would be cool. However, for the how-to speech, you don't have to do a preparation outline. And so we're not so interested in the works cited part, but going forward for the next two speeches after that, your informative speech and your persuasive speech, you will need to turn in a preparation outline, and they will require works cited section at the end of the outline. Basically, a preparation outline is every single thing you plan to say in a speech, word for word, sentence to sentence. I know you're thinking to yourself, well, if it's an outline, why do we put everything in it? Isn't an outline just supposed to be like a guide that you use? Some outlines are like that. In fact, your speaking outline is going to be very much like that. This preparation outline is basically you writing your speech sentence by sentence in a way that helps you to be able to learn it and edit it better. So let's see an example. I'm going to take this down real quick, and I'm going to pop up an outline example. Whoops. Am I still? Hold on. Share my screen. Thank you. There we go. Sorry about that. Sharing can be fun. So this is what I expect your written preparation outline to look like when you submit it. Up here in the corner, I want your name, the class, and the date that you're turning it in, like you would almost any other paper. Remember what I said goes at the very top. Before you do anything else, I want your specific purpose and your central idea statement. For the purposes of this example, the student who wrote this outline was basically doing an informative speech, talking to their audience, which was our class, about chili peppers. So kind of a broad topic, really. I would have preferred it be a little narrow, but the outline was so good, I'm using it. So you will always write your specific purpose statement starting with an infinitive verb phrase. Remember basically the 4 types of specific purposes or general purposes. They are to inform, to persuade, to entertain, and to commemorate. A how-to speech is basically an informative speech. For the purposes of this speech, we're starting with to inform because it's an informative speech. And the purpose specifically of what this student was wanting to speak about was about chili peppers. So specific purposes to inform my audience about chili peppers. Very general, but it does the job. After he did all of his research, thought about what he wanted to talk about what he could fit into 4 minutes, came up with the central idea, which basically it's one sentence that says everything you plan to say in your speech. What's your speech about in one sentence? His is chili peppers are a spicy food with an interesting history and many other uses besides eating. Now, once again, it's very general. I would prefer him break it out into whichever sections he plans to talk about, but it's a central idea. I can't deny that it is one sentence that says everything that the speech is about. So if we're looking to then how the rest of the outline comes along, the first section is going to be the introduction. The middle part with all the information is the body. And the end part is, there it is, conclusion. At the end, you can either call it a bibliography or works cited. I prefer works cited. However, notice that all of these 4 sections, the header is centered and bolded. That's exactly what I want. So if I'm looking at your outline, I see, okay, first thing I'm going to look at is the introduction. Second big section is the body. Third, conclusion. Fourth, works cited. These are the only things that are going to be centered in your outline. Okay, so there's the conclusion, there's the bibliography. All righty then. Now you would think the first thing we're going to jump right into is the introduction. No, it is not. The first thing we're going to do after we, well, in fact, we talked about this last week. If we're just figuring out what we're going to do for our speech, we figure out the specific purpose, then we figure out what main points we want, and that helps us develop our central idea statement. So if I'm writing my speech, I don't even think about the introduction first, which is strange, isn't it? Because a lot of times when you start thinking about a report you want to write or a speech you want to give, you start thinking about all the fun ways to get attention. Because that's kind of the fun part of a speech, is coming up with, you know, the good stuff at the beginning. That's actually some of the last stuff you should be thinking about. So when we're looking at what you start working on first, it should be the body. The main points are all of the different sections of the body where you're going to be telling us what you're informing us about. So if you remember in the central idea, basically chili peppers are a spicy food with an interesting history and then many other uses. If he had broken out these many other uses, they would be all the different parts of the body. So the first main point, chili peppers have a long and fascinating history. Remember, he mentioned that in his central idea. The next main point, Roman numeral 2, he starts talking about why chili peppers are spicy, why they have the heat that they do. That is main point 2. The pleasure and pain involved with eating chili peppers comes from a chemical called capsaicin. Okay, the next thing he wants to talk about in his speech is main point 3. And it's basically all the things you should do if you come into contact with a hot pepper, how to counteract the effects. So first main point, history, chili peppers. Second one, why are they so spicy and how are they hot? 3, what should you do if you come in contact with a hot pepper? And then I think he has a 4. Yep, he certainly does. Just some, remember the alternate uses for chili peppers he mentioned? Yep. Chili peppers are used in personal protection products as well as for medicinal purposes or medical purposes. So he's got 4 main points, and everything under these main points has to be about that main point. So, for example, when he's talking about the history, he basically is talking about where it got the name from, where it was first cultivated, who grew them, when did they come to the Western Hemisphere, that kind of stuff. If it's related to history, it's all going to be organized under this number 1 main point. And if you're used to outlining, you know that basically the A and the B are your subpoints. And these are kind of the things that support that point. So you're going to have, this is basically a heading. This is what this paragraph is about. Your subpoint are all statements that support that main point. And then a subpoint supports the subpoint. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but I just want you to see, basically, we kind of have a top statement, and then this statement supports that statement. This statement supports the A, and then the 2, because it's indented under the A, that also supports the A. When you read this speech, basically what you're going to do is just go line by line. And if you can see, with this indenting and step down process, every sentence has its own line. So you can basically look very easily, see every sentence at a glance, and figure out, okay, do I need more information here? Or maybe this sentence doesn't really go here. Maybe I need to put it somewhere else. A lot of times if you're writing things straight on in a paragraph, it's hard to pick out individual points, individual details. This makes it very easy for you. So, you know, his B subpoint, which also supports the fact that they have a long and fascinating history. Basically, it's talking about how Columbus and came to the Western Hemisphere. After that, we started having chili peppers because they came from Latin America to Europe and other places. He cites the Cambridge World History of Food. 50 years after he returned to Spain with sample plants, chili peppers were being grown in coastal areas from Africa to Asia, and from there they spread around the globe. We're still talking about history. You know, notice he hasn't really talked about, you know, the heat of a chili pepper. Why? Because that's not about the history. He hasn't really started talking about modern uses for the chili pepper. Why? Because that's not about the history. Those belong to different points, which he has below. So we have a history section, and all the sentences are separated out line by line. Note, please, they are all full sentences. Every sentence has a subject, every sentence has a verb, every sentence has proper grammar with punctuation. I can't tell you how many times I will say this. I'll probably mention it in every lecture you see. And then at the end of the term, someone will still be turning in an outline full of just phrases, and I'll have to ding you because they're not full sentences. So, we have a line here that talks about, you know, chili peppers and how pervasive they became through the history of their growing and spreading throughout the globe. Then we come to main point 2, which talks about, and I hate that thing that pops up, the pleasure and pain involved with eating chili peppers comes from a chemical called capsaicin. That's what makes them spicy and hot. So everything underneath this main point 2 has to refer to the spiciness of peppers and capsaicin. Capsaicin is concentrated in the veins and seeds. It refers to a book called Spices, Herbs, and Edible Fungi. How you can measure the intensity of a chili pepper's power, and because there's two, that gives him a number one, the first method. And then the way we most widely measure today is through the high performance liquid chromatography test. So that helps you split things out. He actually goes to a sub point, which you don't necessarily have to, but it follows, this sentence basically supports this sentence, which supports this sentence, which supports this sentence. So if you need to go to a sub point, have fun with it. But a lot of times I find we usually only ever need to go to like the ones and twos. Now, one thing you might have noticed, and I hope you have, is that we don't have any hanging subpoints. What is a hanging subpoint? I'm glad you asked. A hanging subpoint is just a single sentence underneath a main point or a subpoint. You might notice that wherever we have an A subpoint underneath a main point, we also have a B. Wherever there's a 1, we also have a 2. Wherever we have a little a, we have a little b. We don't have just an a hanging out by itself under a 1. Why is that, you might wonder? Because sometimes there's just like one extra thing you want to say. The thinking is that if there's only one extra detail you want to say, that's not enough to really make it a worthwhile point. If you can only find one supportive piece of information to share about a point or a subpoint, just keep it to the point or subpoint. You don't necessarily have to add something below if it's just this little thing that's hanging out there by itself. So, like I said, for your main points, if there is a capital A, you need at least a capital B, and a C and a D and an E if you need to go that far. If you have a number 1, you need at least a number 2, and a 3 and a 4 and a 5, and so on and so on. If you don't understand the hanging subpoints thing, it's a little complex, but I'll show you some examples as we do them in real time, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So we have our main point 2. Look, he goes to a C and he goes to a D. And all of this section, he's talking about how hot chili peppers are, why they're hot, how we measure the heat. Then we go to main point 3. If you come in contact with a hot pepper, you should know how to counteract its effects. It says one thing not to do. And then he says what you should do. So he's got an A, he's also got a B. Because he's got a 1, he's also got a 2. Keep moving. And you might have noticed between the main points, we have a transition statement. The transition statement always goes between, from where you're moving from one main point to another. And it's basically a sentence that transitions you from that part to this part. So that if you're giving your speech, it's not so jarring where you make one point and then you just go to another one without saying, okay, now that we've talked about why, you can see why we're leading to Z. So here, we just went from this part that talks about how you should protect yourself against hot chilies. And then the bottom, the last main point, chili peppers are used in personal protection products as well as for medical purposes. The transition, it's in parentheses. The word transition is all cap. Although chili peppers are prized above for all the flavor they add to food, they have other benefits as well. So we've been talking about why they're so hot, why they're so spicy, how to protect yourself from being spicy. And now we're going to talk about something that's not really related to eating them. So you can see why we need a transition statement there. You don't need a transition statement between all of your main points, but if you're going from from one thing to another thing, and they're really very different from each other, you probably need to do a transition statement. So here, they're used in personal protection products. He's got an A, he's got a B statement, he's got a 1, he's got a 2 statement, he's got a 3 sub point. So then he goes to the conclusion. And once again, everyone always thinks the conclusion and the introduction are the most fun things to write about, and they are. We're going to talk about introductions and conclusions in a future lecture. And then below that, we have works cited, which back then we just lit as bibliography. But nowadays, because we have so many different types of works, we have virtual works, we have internet works, we have all sorts of things. Works cited is probably what we do best. So I have posted this exact sample outline on this class content for this week. So if you want to come back and take a look at it, that works perfectly well. If you've never done alphanumeric outlining before, let me know and I'll set you up with some resources. Might need to set you up with some YouTube videos so you can kind of see how they work. While we're here, so let's kind of go through a process. If you were going to write a preparation outline for your how-to speech, remember they're not required, but if I were going to write one, just so you can kind of see how the process works, let's do that right now, shall we? Let's do it. So basically, we're doing a speech that I decided to do when I was at the grocery store the other day, and a guy asked me for help picking out tomatoes, and I actually started talking so much, he was like, too much information, please. And I thought, this will be a good idea for a how-to speech. So if I'm writing my outline, we always start, remember, top left corner, name, this is me. Don't put Penny Brooks because that's not you. Class, 1100, section 4. And today's date is February 12, 2023. And so remember, we always start with the specific purpose statement. Not really a statement, specific purpose, and then your central idea statement. Specific purpose starts off with our general purpose. General purposes, there are 4: to inform, to persuade, to entertain, to commemorate. Generally, it's one of those 4 things, sometimes a combo, but usually there's one big thing you want to do with your speech. A how-to speech is always an informative speech because you're informing people how to do something. And so we always start with the infinitive verb phrase: to inform, to commemorate, to persuade, to entertain. In this case, to inform. Whom? My audience. Sometimes it can be more specific than that. If you have a very specific audience, you could say to inform my class, to inform the people of Georgia, to inform the people of the world. In this case, if you just put my audience, that's fine. To inform my audience, how to select tomatoes for cooking and other uses. Mostly for cooking. So for cooking, I mean, if you make a salad, it's not exactly cooking, but it kind of is. I'm just going to say for cooking. Because otherwise, if you say other uses, it makes it sound like we're going to be using them like polish, china or something, and we're not. So, okay. So that's my specific purpose. Anything that has to do with selecting tomatoes for the purpose of cooking or eating them, or eating, that might work. Dang. And this is the fun thing about brainstorming when you're doing your outline, is you can change things up, take things out, put things in, see how they work, take them out if they don't work. So anything that's about selecting tomatoes for cooking or eating can go in my speech. Anything that's not about selecting tomatoes for cooking or eating, I want to talk about the history of the tomato. I want to talk about, the use of tomatoes if you want to polish china, if that's actually a thing. That doesn't go in here because it's not for cooking or eating. Central idea. Now you might think I just throw that one out right now. Au contraire. Why? Because I haven't really organized what my main points are. I don't know what I'm talking about yet, other than we're talking about selecting tomatoes. And because for this assignment, I'm basically letting you pick something out of your brain, something you do know. You don't have to cite sources or anything. You don't have to do research ahead of time unless you want to. Ordinarily, I would have you do research, figure out what you know, then come up with your main points. But in this case, not so much. So let's just get some space down here for some brainstorm action. So if I'm in the grocery store and I've been selecting tomatoes for many years, what are the things that I think about as I sort through them? We can select, by color, because a bright color is always better than a light pink, which shows that it's not ripe yet. But also you don't want it turning like brownish, bruises, stuff like that. So color is a good way to start. What else? We select by, usually I feel them by feel or texture. because a nice, juicy, good tomato is going to be firm, but not hard. It's going to have a little bit of give to it so you can feel how juicy it is. But it's not going to be mushy to where it's just squishy, not squishy. So firm, but not hard, juicy, not squishy. And I hope you know squishy is definitely a descriptive adjective. So I've got select by color. That could be a good point. Select by feel or texture could be another good main point. What else do I, oh. Okay, first, what I have to think about is what I'm using the tomatoes for, because you use different tomatoes for different things. Okay, that's cool. Select by use. Okay. So like if I'm gonna make a sauce, you know, I choose one tomato, whatever. I wonder if I have select by type, and then I can select, spelling is good, by or select organic or non-organic. Some people do prefer organic, but honestly, that's not a big thing. If you're in a store, you just look at the organic section. And I'm not really talking about the virtues of organic tomatoes versus non-organic tomatoes, because that's not, this is about how to select them for use in your recipes. I think if I start talking about organic stuff, I have to really kind of get in why it's a thing. And that's a distraction from the rest of my speech. So let's take that one out. Okay, so let's see, I've got by color, feel or texture, by use, and more type. You know, by use is kind of the same thing as by type, because you pick the type of tomato according to the use that you're going to have for it. So that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? I don't really want to make those two different points because they're the same point, you know? So, all right, I think too, I need to figure out what order to go in. So these are kind of the same thing. And I'm in store. Remember, how-to speeches, generally we want to go in order of whatever you would do first. That's what you talk about first, whatever you do second. It goes in that kind of order. If you read the book, you know there's all different ways you can order things. But for how-to, it's generally very much a temporal order. And the first thing you should think about is what you're going to be using the tomatoes for. You're not going to look at a tomato and then go, am I going to, is this the right use? No, okay, let me start over again. So let's start working on my main points here. My first main point, and remember it's Roman numeral 1, and I write in sentences. The first thing to consider when selecting tomatoes at a store is their use. What will you do with your tomato? What will you make with your tomatoes? Okay, that's a sentence. And so I can take this part out, that's done. And I need part of the way I'm going to talk about is by type. So, whoops, now see, if you, Word will assume it knows what you're doing. So you can't just let it take the lead. You have to take the lead. So I know what comes next is a capital letter. So my subpoints to my main point that I'm going to talk about, we make with your tomatoes. Let's see. First thing, what they're used. What will you make with your tomatoes? And we're talking about what type. The something we say is there are many uses for tomatoes. For example, sauces, salads, sandwiches, stir fry, sautés, you name it. So I can talk, what will you make with your tomatoes? I need, what is their use? I can say, well, first thing is just know there's a lot of things you can use them for. And then the B part is going to be some tomato types, spelling types is good, are appropriate for some uses but not for others. Oh, there's another way I could say this. Each tomato type or each use has one or more tomato types that are best for it, and some types that are not good for it. And because I'm brainstorming, I can go back and fix the writing later on. I just want to get my brain down. So like, for example, many uses, sauces, salads, and then underneath this B, now remember it needs to be a 1, so I need to tell it how to do its job. I could say, for example, tomato sauce is usually best with plum or Roma. 2 names for Roma tomatoes. And then a good 2 would be salads. Or I can say like small tomatoes like grape, or what are the little yellow ones? Pear tomatoes are usually good for salads, but not for sauces. Have you ever tried to make a sauce with grape or pear tomatoes? I mean, they're good for saute, but if you're making a sauce, all those little tiny skins, you got to get rid of. It's not good. So, you know, everything that I do, like for example, the 1 and the 2 here, they support what I'm saying. The fact that each tomato type of use has types that are good for it. These, the B and the A, they moderate, you know, the first, what the use, what are you going to make? So you have to think about the uses for the tomatoes, and you have to think about the type and know which types go with which kind. Okay, so I can build more on that, but while I'm brainstorming, I just want to get them on the paper. So I've talked about my type and my bit, and they were just, and my uses, and they were the kind of same point. I think I want to do color next, because that's the next thing after you decide, okay, what am I doing with the tomatoes? What type of tomato is best for that use? Main point number 2 is the second thing to consider when selecting tomatoes at a store is their color. Now notice that I started off by saying the first thing, and then I started by saying the second thing, and I mirrored that actually. The second thing to consider when selecting, the first thing to consider when selecting. This actually is a good aid for people who are in the audience. It really tells them, okay, we finished with that first bit. The second thing, and it mirrors what I've said before, letting them know, okay, we're still on the same topic of choosing tomatoes, but here's the next thing we're talking about is their color. And then I want to start talking about, let's throw out some A, nope, not that A. We want a capital A. You want to give them to me? There we go. You have to play with it sometimes in Word. I know it's crazy. The color to look for, no matter if red or yellow or orange, is one that is bright and shiny. That's a sentence. Let's say the color not to choose is one that is too light or too dark. Okay, fine, let it go. I've got to redo this. And I'm in the middle of recording, so I'm gonna have to edit this now. That's okay. I'll go.
Put it in.
No, don't, just let it sit. Okay, too dark. Let me go back. Okay. So then, here we go. So the color to avoid, the colors to avoid are those that are very light or very dark and dull. Okay, so and I can do a little one down here. One. Very light pink or yellow can mean, oh no, often mean the tomato is unripe. And then two, dark and dull tend to mean that the tomato is overripe or too old. Well, I think that's the same thing, isn't it? Is overripe. There we go. So I'm going to add more to it. Don't worry. This is just getting thoughts down. And then my third main point is, and I need to put some space between here. So there we go. By the feel or texture. So the third, did I do that right? Is it back enough? Yep, okay. Fun of outlining. The third thing to consider when selecting tomatoes at a store is by feel or texture. And then my A and my B and my 1, my 2 will all be about, you know, if it's hard and feels dense, it usually means it's not ripe enough. If it's, you know, really squishy, that usually means it's overripe and or has been damaged in shipment. So I need to write sentences for that. And all while I'm thinking about this, I have to be thinking about my visual or presentation aids. So I have to be thinking, okay, if I'm showing the difference between good tomatoes and bad tomatoes, do I need actual tomatoes? Like, do I have to go out and find a bad tomato and then find a really good tomato so I can be like, here's this bad one, here's this good one. See, this one's shiny and has a good color. This one's dull and gross. Or I need some that might be, this is too young of a tomato. See, it's really light pink, feels very heavy. This one is squishy and mushy. This one is just right because it has a little bit of feel to it. You can feel the juice, but it's not heavy. It's more, you know, it feels like a nice rubber ball, basically. I need to either, I can have real tomatoes. Now they might be expensive. And if I don't have any money, I'm like, okay, the real tomatoes are out. Maybe I need pictures. I can show pictures at least of the color part. And you don't need just one visual aid sometimes. You can have various kinds. So if you have visual aids of tomatoes that show the color, you might have pictures that show the color, the range, you know, between unripe and ripe. But then if we're talking about the feel, I might have like a squishy tomato and I might have a hard tomato and I might have a just right tomato. You know, I guess if you work in vegetable sciences, you might have models of good tomatoes and bad. I don't know, probably not. But you can mix them up. You can have actual items for one step, and then you can have pictures for another. You know, if there was a video of someone squishing tomatoes, showing how good tomatoes are, you might be able to use that. Let your brain go crazy. But I have to be thinking about, okay, do I need to go to the store and find good versus bad tomatoes? Let's say I go to the store and right now there's only bad tomatoes because it's February. You know, if I can't find any good tomatoes, I have to think of a plan B, basically. So these are things you have to think about before you start actually recording your speech. You have to have the right visual aid. And we're going to talk more about presentation aids later on in this video. So by feel of texture, and let's say I build up all of my body and get it really working. And so, now I can do my central idea because it's basically, I've worked out what all my main points are going to be. Now I know what my central idea is. And my central idea, I think, is going to be, it's easy to select, or I'm going to demonstrate how to, but I think my central idea is not going to be as obvious as that one. It's easy to select tomatoes at a store if you consider 3 things. My phone is going off. 3 things. Their uses, for cooking and eating. Okay, select tomatoes for cooking and eating, not at a store. I gotta think of the right way to word this. At a store. So you think, let me think about how I'm gonna write this because I have to do it the right way. My specific purpose and my central idea have to align. For cooking, let me see. It's easy to select good tomatoes for cooking and eating if you consider three things. One, their uses. Two, their color. And three, their feel or texture. Now I say below tomatoes at a store. I just kind of was throwing that in there, but I don't have to keep that in, so I can go back and fix that. And look, I have all the points in my main, all the items or what the intent is behind my main points are in my central idea, the 1, 2, 3. The main idea, this is what my speech is about. If someone comes up, hey, what's your speech about in one sentence? I can say, well, it's that it's easy to select good tomatoes, or I'm showing today how to select good tomatoes for cooking and eating by choosing their use, by knowing what by considering, that's a good word, their uses, their color, and their texture or feel. That's a sentence too. Whatever you need to do to make sure that all the components of your speech are represented, not the introduction or conclusion, but all the main points in one sentence. You don't have to describe them too much, just bang, there it is. So remember what this part of the speech is called? It's called the body. And remember, it doesn't stay over here. It goes there, and it's there. I think I can take out that line. There we go. And eventually I will, does your phone do this too? I'm sorry. Introduction. It's going to go up before the body. There we go. And then after the body, we have conclusion. So I'm going to work on the body first. I know the introduction is fun, and the conclusion, a lot of times people think of it as just kind of a throwaway. These are things we have to get used to not doing anymore. The main everything of your speech is going to be in the body. Work on that first. Once you have all the body together, then the rest is easy. It's golden. So let's say I spend a lot of time working my body. My 3 main points are all fleshed out. They're full of detail. I've been timing myself, so I know I'm not giving an 8-minute speech when a 4-minute is my limit. And it's time for me to do my introduction. It's kind of weird because with alphanumeric outlining, all the different sections of a speech, the introduction, the body, the conclusion, they all start with Roman numeral 1, which is weird, but that's the way we do it. So when I get to my introduction, I'm going to start with Roman numeral 1, and this will be the first sentence that I say. Remember, everything you plan to say needs to be in your outline. You don't go off the cuff. Anything you plan to say should be on your outline in sentence form. Anything you think, well, I'll just throw something in later, or I just really need a few words here and I'll wing it. No, everything you plan to say should be in your outline. So the first sentence I say is going to be Roman numeral 1 under introduction, and that's not what I'm going to say, but that's a placeholder. This will be the second sentence that I say, and we're going to put sentences down until the very last thing before the body, and that will be the central idea. So moving from my introduction to the body, I'm going to throw out my central idea. I'm introducing basically the idea of selecting tomatoes that, in stores nowadays, it's hard to tell if you're looking at the cellophane paper. They have all the different kinds, they have all the different colors of tomatoes, they have all these different things. How can you know what you should use? How do you choose a good tomato at the grocery store? Well, that could be all the sentences in my introduction. It's easy to select. And in fact, your fourth one, if you just want to copy and paste it in there, because that is basically what you say at the end of your introduction. Now you might say, gosh, when I see real speech givers like the president and people like that, they don't just go throwing out their central idea as part of their speech. And I'm going to stop this thing from beeping. Please forgive me. Usually I don't have this as a problem. There we go. If I'm watching a speech given by a CEO at a business or whatever, it's not like they're as regimented as this and they just don't spit out, what I'm going to tell you now is this. And here's what my speech is going to be about. Bang. No, but they've had more practice at it. They're more subtle. And honestly, if a lot of these people actually came out and were very blunt about what their purposes were, it can be distracting for what their real purposes are. So for our purposes, because we're newbie speech writers, we're going to be very specific. So the last sentence of your introduction generally should be your central idea. And then that goes right into your body. If we have any sentences we want to use as transitions between our main point 1 and main point 2, we'll put a transitional statement right there. If we have anything we want to say in between main point 2 and main point 3, we will put it right here. So this is basically getting started with your outlining. Hopefully it wasn't too weird. If you're not used to outlining at all, please let me know. I'll set you up with some resources. If you have outlined a bit before, that will be helpful. Just know for speech writing, it's a little different, but as long as you get the whole Roman numeral, capital letter, number thing, that will help a lot. So when you're writing a speech, and I think you probably should practice doing your how-to speech by writing it out, even though you don't have to turn it in. It'll help you because the next 2 speeches, you do have to turn in your preparation outline, and using this process will help you a lot. So let me stop sharing. We'll go back to, so a speaking outline I mentioned very much earlier. These are just brief notes you're going to use to help you when you're presenting your speech. You don't turn them in. So I don't care what they look like. They can be handwritten with notes that while you're practicing, you'd be like, oh, do this here, do that there. It doesn't matter what they look like. You will not turn them in. I do not care to see them. They are not then just your preparation outline in teeny tiny font for you to read word for word. And don't think that I won't be able to tell, because I totally can. Everybody can. If I show the speech and be like, okay, tell me, are they reading it or have they practiced it? Everybody will know in just a second if you're reading your speech. It's just is very obvious. Don't use like just full-size pieces of paper because they can be distracting. They make noise. You shuffle them around. They're big. They can be just, noisy and distracting. Use note cards or cut paper in half to make like note paper. If you have a notepad, using those pages are fine. Just don't use full 8.5 by 11 pages. And then don't use your phone or your laptop for your notes. Some people will like, okay, I'm recording myself on my phone, but I'm gonna have my laptop right here with my notes on it so I can do like this. Just use the note cards. It's perfectly fine. Keep them in your hand while using your gestures. You just keep them like this, looking at them. Okay, there's my note. Da, 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 da. Nobody cares. What they will notice is when you have to give the weird side eye to things, or you're too busy trying to read all the tiny words that are on your tiny pieces of paper because you didn't practice enough. So if you practice enough and all you need are some brief phrases to help you get from point to point to point, things that you might have like while you're giving your speech, oh goodness, what comes next? That's it. Okay, I can keep moving now. That's exactly what your speaking outline should do. Short phrases of whatever you need to get through your points and your subpoints, and then notes to yourself regarding delivery. Sometimes when I'm giving a speech, I find that the sections I'm not real happy about, or I just feel like, ugh, this isn't the interesting stuff to me. Sometimes I can talk real fast, and I have to remind myself, slow down, take a breath. Or I might have words that I feel like I need to use for emphasis. So I will underline or circle them. This is a word I want to pound and make sure people understand it. Give an accent to this word. So whatever you need to help you present your speech better with just some brief notes, and you'll know what parts you've got down pat versus the parts that are a little to you. So the parts you know down pat, great. Maybe just a couple of deep, deep, deep. The parts that you need a little more help with, a couple of phrases there. If you practice, you'll know what parts these are. You'll know exactly what parts to include in your speaking outline. You'll be fine. All right. So a few words about presentation aids. And I know I call them visual aids quite a lot. I'm from old school public speaking, but nowadays we have a lot of presentation aids like PowerPoint. We have visual aids, virtual aids, all sorts of things. So just calling things visual aids. There's also all sorts of different senses. If I happen to be in a classroom and I'm showing how to make a pizza and I'm actually making a pizza and you can smell the pizza, that's alerting your sense of smell. That's part of the presentation. If I'm demonstrating how great this mosquito repellent works, and I'm standing in front of a crowd at your local grocery store, everybody hates bug bites, everybody hates mosquitoes. And the great thing about this one is it doesn't smell like terrible bug spray, and people smell it and they go, oh, that does smell good. That's part of the presentation. That's an aid to people's understanding and your persuasion. So for our point though, because you're going to be recording it and showing it on a screen, visual aid is pretty much where we're at. Read the chapter, a huge variety of things you can use to help make your points, but don't just go for the easiest thing and then I'm going to do, a speech on how to use a mouse because it's right here. And I'll show you, okay, this is the clicky thing. This is the roly thing, whatever. No, you need to really present how to do something that's interesting to you, that you really know something about, and that's going to be interesting to people, and not just, oh my goodness, I'm doing it this at the last minute. What's something easy and something I have on hand? How to open up a soda can. It's got a pull tab. Don't do that. It's lame. And I'll just look at it like this. But then choosing which visual aids to use, whether it's an actual object or a picture or a chart or a person, choosing what kind of visual aid is important. Remember when I was talking about the tomatoes, I thought, well, it would just be easy if I just had tomatoes that demonstrated, this is a bad looking tomato. This is a good looking tomato. This is a pretty tomato. This is an ugly tomato. What if I don't have tomatoes that really show that? What if I'm doing things in person and I have a huge audience and I'm showing people like a little tiny grape tomato? Are they going to be able to see it? I have to think about all these kind of things. So the things you need to think about when you're selecting which visual aids or presentation aids depend on a number of factors. One is visibility. Make sure that people really can see what you're talking about and what you're showing how to do. So if I've been talking about making a lot of pies lately. So if I want to show how to make a pie, I can either have all the ingredients and really demonstrate how to make a pie. Here's how I make a crust. Here's how I make the filling. But I need to make sure people can really see what I'm doing. Now, doing our how-to speech remotely and being able to record it using your phone or laptop, we actually have an exemption in this case, where usually we have to do all in one shot, but I can actually do it in several shots this time. So if I need to do some close-ups or angle the camera down so you can see me laying out a crust, filling up the crust, putting the crust on top, making little crimping around the edges, that is something that I can make visible. But let's say I'm showing how to make a pie to a huge group of people, the Ladies Aid Society of Sumter County. And there's 400 women in there. They're all in this big crowded room. And I might be able to do a demonstration if I have a camera and stuff and they're going up on screens. But if I don't have all that technology, I need to think about how to really make this work. Maybe I need to pre-make a pie, take pictures of me doing it or take video of me doing it and then show that up on the screens so that people can really see the small images, the details, so they can see them. Or, gosh, if I don't have the technology to make that happen, maybe I find pictures of people making pies and I can say, okay, see, this person is using a crimping technique, or you can make the zigzag, or you can just use a fork, to crimp the pie crust. But I need to have pictures that really show what I'm talking about. So pictures might be good in some situations, video might be good in other situations, actual items to make a pie might be best in other situations. You really have to think about the situation before you start thinking about what presentation aid you might need. Understandability. This particularly comes into play when we're talking about charts, graphs, when we're talking about statistics. You've been in a class before, right? Where someone has popped up a PowerPoint screen and it's got a big chart or a graph on it, and you're looking at it going, I don't know what I'm supposed to be seeing here. You've got bars going in all directions. Some of them are red, some of them are green, some are blue, some are up, some are down. There's a line, and you're sitting there going, I don't, okay. You need to make sure people, upon looking at your visual aid, understand what they're supposed to be seeing and understanding. Make sure you use the right graph for whatever statistics you're trying to use. Make sure you use the right chart for whatever statistics you're supposed to be trying to use. If you're talking about something technical, you might want to break things apart into their component pieces so people kind of understand what you're supposed to be happening. Usability is another fun factor. Is this something you can use, or how to use enough in front of other people so that you can hold it up, you can show it, you can use it, you can demonstrate, and it's not going to get in the way of other things. So make sure you know how to use whatever you're supposed to be using, and that applies especially to technology. If you're going to be using a PowerPoint presentation, if you're going to be using video, make sure that the technology of the location you're at is able to accommodate you. Can't tell you how many times I've been involved with people at speeches and they show up with their PowerPoint on a thumb drive, and then the person goes, well, did you bring a laptop? And they go, I thought you would have one. Oh, no, we don't have one here. So check in advance. That's always good. A lot of times I just bring what I think. If calamity strikes and nothing is available, what will I need? Just bring everything, and then you'll never have a problem. Although sometimes you go places, oh, no outlets. Well, that's a problem. When I first started using PowerPoints way a long time ago, we were always advised to have both poster forms and the slides on PowerPoint, so that if you didn't have a way to do the PowerPoint with a screen and a laptop or a computer, you would just pull up your posters and they'd be just as good. Which I was always like, you have to do this twice. But then you're always prepared. So make sure you know how to use everything. If you've never used PowerPoint before, you should learn it. And not just assume you know how to hit all the buttons or what you need to do. And then distractibility is a super fun one. Make sure that your visual aids are not going to be distracting from what you're trying to say. If I'm making a pie, and I've got a pie in the oven, because one of the things we like to do is at the end show, oh, this is the final product. So let's say we have a lovely pie in the oven. I'm in front of the Ladies Aid Society of Sumter County, and I'm demonstrating how to bake the crust and how to do all the stuff. And in the meantime, I've got this pie that's in the oven, ready for me to pop it out and show at the end, and it smells amazing. It smells like heavenly apples and cinnamon and sugar. Throughout my speech, all these women are just going to be like, oh. And then you think there's 400 people there and one pie. That's distracting. Here's a fun story from my old journalism days. Whenever you do a stand-up interview, which is basically a part where a reporter stands in front of the camera and just talks about where they are and what they're doing. And I was doing a speech at Christmas time. We're talking about when and when not to buy pets for kids at Christmas. The answer usually is never, but that's a whole other thing. And so I went to visit this pet store, and they were talking about how exotic pets were kind of the vogue at the time. And I thought, ooh, can I borrow your ferret? so that I can hold it while I'm doing my stand-up. You might think this exotic ferret is the perfect, surprise gift for your kids. However, they take a lot of work. That's all pretty much what I was going to say. It took me forever. Why? Because the ferret is an animal and was not just going to sit there quietly while I held it to do the stand-up. It was wiggly and squirmy and wanted to run all over my body. And finally, I was holding it tight, so tightly at the end, it basically just gave up and started just hanging there like I'm dead. And it looked like I was holding a dead ferret at the end. It's so even if it's squirmy and whatever, distractible, it looks like it's just kind of hanging there limply, distracting. Should not have gone for the ferret. Maybe should have gone for, I keep saying like a kitten, but no, kittens are too cute. People are looking at the kitten and not at you. So you really have to find visual aids that are not going to take the attention off what you're supposed to be talking about. A lot of people like to bring their kids in. I'm going to show how to braid my daughter's hair. Da, 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 da. And the kid is a kid and is not going to sit there for like 5 minutes quietly unless they're a super good kid. But a lot of times they're just, they're being kids. Got to make sure they work for that. This is why a lot of times if people want to demonstrate hairstyles and such, they use wigs. They use those heads with the hair on them. You just have to make sure whatever you're using is not going to somehow steal focus from you. People also like to, whenever they're doing a speech, and they're using this is my demonstration. I went to Africa and I got this cool mask. And this is a perfect example of culture of the people that I went to visit. And what they do is after they show it and you're like, oh, that's very nice, they pass it through the audience. In case you want to see it close up, here, we're going to do that. Well, you've just totally distracted everybody. Why? Because they're all watching the item go through the audience. You have to watch for when it's coming your way. When it comes to your way, you're looking at it and not the speaker anymore. Then you have to look at who you give it to. That person's looking away. You basically just distracted everybody. So don't give people items in the speech. At the end, you might say, after all the speeches today, I'll have this at my desk. If you'd like to have a close-up look, please come by. I'd love to show you. Whew. So presentation aids, not just a matter of saying, okay, what am I talking about? I'll find one of those, bang. There's a lot of things you have to consider if you want to be effective with your speech. Whew, that's a lot of stuff, isn't it? So I know we went through a lot today. Remember, this week, quiz 2 opens Wednesday, the 15th, and it closes Friday, the 17th at 11:59 p.m. And let me move myself so you can see that better. There you go. So you have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 3 days to take the quiz. It covers all the chapters we've had from week 2 through now, actually through last week. I don't think there's anything on outlining or visual aids in this one. If there's a term in there, it's good that you know what those terms are. If there are things that it says, here are things you need to be mindful of. Be mindful of those things. The quiz really, if you've done the readings and you followed through with all the lectures, should not be any trouble. Not a bit. So don't be worried, but take it. And then don't forget, next week, you have your how-to speech with visual aid due. I think it's due by Friday at 11:59. So if you have questions or concerns about what you're planning, how you're going to do it, this week is the time to contact me, work things through so that next week you can practice, record yourself, get done, be effective with your visual aid or your presentation aid, and then whew, done. We can jump into the second half of our course. Can you believe we're already heading into, informative speeches and then persuasive speeches, which are the big shebang. So just a reminder, please, if you have any questions or you find yourself, you feel like you're behind, you feel like you're not understanding things, you're not quite knowing how well you're doing. Am I keeping up well? Am I not? When it comes to the outlining, I can certainly see people might look at that and be like, I didn't do a lot of outlining. Can you kind of give me a refresher? Or maybe there's something I can be looking at online that can help. Absolutely. Send me an email. I'm happy to work things out with you. I'm happy to take a look at things in advance. I'm happy to work through a process with you. feel free, email me. We'll set up a time. We can either chat or we can type it out or we can meet by Zoom or Teams. I'm very accessible. So a lot of work this week. We're heading into the good stuff of the class. I hope you think so anyway. I certainly do. Hold on, keep going, chug through there. We'll be at spring break before you know it. All right, contact me if you need to. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.